The summer heat clung to the cracked pavement of Madison Street, waves of steam rising from the asphalt like ghosts of the past. The scent of sizzling meat drifted from a food truck parked near the corner, where people bustled about, lost in the rhythm of a normal afternoon. But for 16-year-old Malik Carter, nothing about today felt normal. He had only meant to ask a question. Cruiser rolled to a stop in front of the liquor store on 3rd and Mayhew. Two white officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts, scanning the sidewalk like hunters looking for prey. Malik hesitated before approaching, his hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets. He wasn't stupid, he knew how things could go sideways in seconds, but he also wasn't going to let fear keep him from speaking his mind. He said, addressing the taller officer with the sharp blue eyes. The man turned, his brow furrowing as he looked Malik up and down. "The hell do you want, kid?" Malik swallowed, keeping his voice steady. "I was just wondering why y'all stopped my neighbor Mr. Jenkins the other day. He's been living here for years." The officer's eyes darkened. "That ain't your business." Malik's jaw tightened. "It kinda is. He's my neighbor." The shorter cop, a stocky man with a shaved head, let out a sharp breath. "Listen, kid, do yourself a favor and walk away." But Malik didn't. He had watched too many people in his neighborhood get harassed for no reason. He wasn't just going to let this slide. "I just think." A sudden shift, a blur of movement. The taller officer's hand shot to his holster, yanking out his gun in one swift motion. He leveled it at Malik's chest, his grip steady, his voice sharp like a blade. "Know your place, boy." The hum of the city faded. The bystanders, the passing cars, the food truck sizzling in the background, it all blurred into nothingness. All he could see was the cold steel of the barrel, the unwavering eyes behind it, and the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. The street froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a plastic grocery bag, oranges rolling across the pavement. A woman pulled her child closer, whispering frantic prayers under her breath. Malik's hands shot up instinctively. His heart pounded against his ribs, every beat hammering the same thought into his skull. "Don't move. I ain't got nothing on me," Malik said, forcing his voice to stay level. The cop's finger hovered over the trigger, his nostrils flaring as if he were trying to decide whether Malik's life was worth ending in that moment. "Step back," the other officer muttered. "You're making a scene." The taller cop didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Malik's, searching for defiance, for an excuse. "Step back," the second officer repeated, this time more forceful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the gun lowered. The tension in the air didn't disappear, but it shifted, crackling with unspoken warnings. Malik didn't dare drop his hands yet. "You got a mouth on you, kid," the officer sneered, shoving the gun back into its holster. "Better learn to shut it before someone shuts it for you." Malik exhaled slowly. His muscles ached from the stillness, but he refused to look away. His pulse roared in his ears, but he stood his ground. "I just asked a question," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer's eyes flickered, a ghost of something unreadable, passing through them before he turned on his heel and stalked back to the cruiser. His partner followed, shaking his head. The car doors slammed shut. The engine roared to life, and just like that, they were gone, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Malik let his hands drop. He turned, the weight of 100 unspoken words pressing on his chest. Around him, people started moving again, murmuring to one another, shaking their heads. Some stole glances at him, their eyes filled with something between fear and admiration. A hand touched his shoulder. He flinched before realizing it was Mrs. Alvarez, the owner of the corner store. Her lined face was tight with worry. "You okay, Neil?" Malik forced a nod. "Yeah, but he wasn't." He could still feel the cold stare of the officer, still hear the sharp edge of his words. "Know your place, boy." Malik clenched his fists. He had a place, and he wasn't about to let anyone tell him otherwise. The night air was thick with humidity, clinging to Malik's skin as he sat on the steps of his apartment building. The streetlights flickered, buzzing like angry insects, casting long shadows across the pavement. The day's events were played in his mind over and over the officer's eyes. "Begone," the words that cut deeper than the threat itself. "Know your place, boy." Malik clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the phone in his lap. He wanted to tell someone what happened. He needed to, but who would listen? His mom already worked 2 jobs, barely keeping things together. His Uncle Dre had his own problems, and his best friend, Jalen, would just tell him to let it go. But Malik couldn't let it go. He stood abruptly, shoving his phone into his pocket. He needed to walk, to breathe, to clear his head. The city never truly slept, even in the late hours. People still drifted through the streets, some stumbling out of bars, others huddled in corners, murmuring in low voices. The usual sirens wailed in the distance, blending into the sounds of car horns and the occasional burst of laughter. Malik's feet carried him toward Mayhew Park, a small patch of green tucked between rows of aging buildings. He and Jalen used to play ball there when they were kids, back when the world felt simpler. Now the basketball courts were cracked, the swings rusted, and the benches were occupied by people who had nowhere else to go. He sat on a bench, rubbing a hand over his face. His mind raced. What if the cop had pulled the trigger? What if this had been the last night of his life? Would the world have even cared? A sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Yo, Malik." He turned to see Jalen jogging up, his hoodie unzipped, exposing a white tank top underneath. His gold chain glinted under the streetlight. "What you doing out here, man?" Jalen asked, dropping onto the bench beside him. Malik hesitated before answering. "Just thinking." Jalen smirked. "You always thinking. What's up?" Malik exhaled, staring ahead. "I almost died today." Jalen's smile faded. "What? A cop pulled a gun on me." Jalen sat up straighter. "What the hell happened?" Malik told him everything, how he asked about Mr. Jenkins, how the cop reacted, how the words still echoed in his mind like a bad song stuck on repeat. Jalen cursed under his breath. "Man, I swear these cops be tripping. You lucky he ain't shoot. Could have been one of those mistaken identity cases. That's the problem," Malik muttered. "I shouldn't have to be lucky. I didn't do nothing wrong." Jalen rubbed the back of his head. "So, what you wanna do?" Malik stared at the pavement, his thoughts swirling. He wasn't sure yet, but he knew one thing: he couldn't just sit back and pretend this never happened. "Something," he said. "I gotta do something." Jalen sighed. "You already got cops watching you, bro. You start making noise, they really gonna come for you." "I ain't scared." Jalen shook his head. "You should be." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of reality pressing down on them. Then footsteps, slow, measured. Malik turned his head and saw 2 figures approaching from the other end of the park. Even in the dim light, he recognized the sharp blue eyes. His stomach clenched. It was the cop, the same one from earlier. But this time, he wasn't in uniform, and he wasn't alone. His partner was with him, dressed in dark jeans and a gray t-shirt, his hand resting on something tucked at his waist. The taller officer smirked as he got closer, his gaze locking onto Malik's like a predator spotting prey. Well, he drawled. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Malik's breath caught in his throat. He glanced at Jalen, whose jaw was tight. "You got a problem?" Malik asked, keeping his voice steady. The cop chuckled. "You know, I've been thinking about you, kid. You seem real eager to stick your nose where it don't belong." Jalen shifted beside him. "Man, we ain't doing nothing. Why you even here?" The second cop smirked. "Just out for a walk. Same as you." Malik knew better. This wasn't coincidence. This was intimidation. "What you want?" Malik asked. The taller cop tilted his head. "I want you to understand something." He stepped closer. Malik's muscles tensed. "See, out here, we keep order." The cop continued. "And boys like you don't question it. You don't get curious. You don't get bold." His voice dropped lower, his words slow and deliberate. "You keep your mouth shut and your head down, or next time, I won't just pull my gun." The message was clear. A warning. A promise. Malik swallowed, the anger rising in his chest. He wanted to fight back, to scream, to tell this man he wasn't afraid. But he wasn't stupid. Jalen grabbed his arm. "Let's bounce, man." Malik held the cop's gaze for a moment longer before nodding. They stood, backing away. The officers didn't move. They just watched. And as Malik and Jalen walked off into the night, he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The night felt heavier now, like the air itself carried a warning. Malik and Jalen walked in silence, their footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. Neither of them spoke until they were several blocks away from the park, the street lights buzzing faintly above them. Jalen finally broke the silence. "Yo, what the hell was that?" Malik shook his head, his fists clenched. They were sending a message. "That wasn't no message, bro. That was a threat." Jalen's voice was low, tense. "They ain't even in uniform, and they still trying to check you. That ain't normal." Malik exhaled sharply. "They want me scared." Jalen scoffed. "And you ain't." Malik stopped walking, turning to face him. "Of course I am." His voice was steady, but his hands still trembled slightly. "But I can't let that stop me." Jalen studied him for a moment before shaking his head. "Man, you tryna play hero, and you don't even got a plan." "I'm not trying to be a hero," Malik muttered. "I just want people to know what's happening. If I let this slide, they'll do it again. To me, to someone else." Jalen rubbed his face, frustrated. "All right, say you do something, what's your move? Go to the police? They all got each other's backs. Post about it. They'll just spin it against you. You really think people gonna believe a black kid over to cops?" Malik frowned. He hated how much truth was in Jalen's words. He didn't have proof, no video, no recording, just his word against theirs. And in this city, he knew whose word carried more weight. But that didn't mean he was going to drop it. "Maybe I don't got proof," he admitted, "but I got a voice, and I'm gonna use it." Jalen sighed. "Just don't do nothing dumb, man." Malik didn't respond. He wasn't sure what counted as dumb anymore. The next morning, Malik woke up to his phone buzzing. "Jalen, bro, check this out." Attached was a link. Malik clicked it, his heart racing as a video loaded. It was security footage, grainy, black and white. It showed them approaching Malik and Jalen, standing too close, speaking too low. Then, as they turned to walk away, the taller cop reached for something at his waist. The video ended before anything else happened. Malik's stomach twisted. He hadn't noticed that last night. Had the cop been reaching for his gun? Just to make sure Malik knew how close he was to danger, he texted Jalen back. "Malik, where'd you get this?" "Jalen, Mr. Patel, from the liquor store," said his cameras caught part of it. "Malik, he just gave it to you." Jalen, "Nah." He was nervous as hell, but he said people need to know what's going on. He don't want trouble, but he ain't gonna stand by either. Malik stared at the video, his pulse thudding in his ears. This was it. This was the proof he needed. He knew exactly what to do. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he took a breath and started typing. "My name's Malik Carter, and last night, 2 off-duty police officers, Mayhew Park. They didn't arrest us. They didn't ask questions. They just wanted to make sure we were scared. This isn't the first time something like this has happened in my neighborhood, and if we don't talk about it, it won't be the last." He attached a video. He read over the post once, twice. Then he hit upload. Jalen called him within minutes. "Bro, tell me you did not just post that." "I did." Jalen groaned. "Man, you just threw yourself into the fire." "Maybe," Malik admitted, "but at least people will see the truth." For a few minutes, nothing happened. The post sat there, just another drop in the endless ocean of social media. Then, a notification popped up. Someone shared your post. Then another, and another. Within an hour, it had over 100 shares. By the end of the night, it was past 1,000. The comments flooded in. Some people were outraged. Others doubted him. But Malik didn't care. The truth was out now. Then, a new notification appeared. A known number. "Take it down." Malik's breath hitched. The message was simple, direct, a warning. His phone buzzed again. Another message. A known number. "You don't want to make enemies, kid. Malik's hands clenched around the phone. He didn't recognize the number, but he didn't have to. He knew exactly who it was. He took a deep breath and typed out a response. Malik. Too late for that. He hit send. And somewhere in the city, he knew someone was watching. Malik barely slept that night. Every sound outside his window made him flinch. Every car that slowed down in the street below made his pulse quicken. The anonymous texts had stopped after the last message. But the silence felt worse. They were watching. The post had exploded overnight. By morning, it had tens of thousands of shares. News pages started picking it up. Activists retweeted it. People were talking, and that meant the cops were paying attention too. Malik knew he couldn't stay in the house forever. He had school. His mom had already left for work, so she didn't know what was happening yet. He wasn't ready to tell her. Not yet. As he stepped outside, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. The world looked different now, like a trap waiting to be sprung. He wasn't wrong. The second he hit the main road, a black and marked car crept along the curb, matching his pace. The tinted windows rolled down slightly, just enough for him to see a familiar face inside. The cop, the same sharp blue eyes, the same smirk. "Morning, boy," the officer drawled. Malik forced himself to keep walking, his hands tightening into fists. "You've been busy," the cop continued. "Real bold of you." Malik clenched his jaw. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a response. "You think posting a video changes anything?" The officer chuckled. "All it does is put a target on your back." Malik kept his eyes forward. "Don't stop. Don't engage." The car sped up just enough to stay beside him. "You're making enemies you can't handle, kid." Malik's heart pounded, but he refused to show fear. He finally turned his head, locking eyes with the cop. "You scared?" The smirk faded. For the first time, Malik saw something flicker in the officer's expression. Annoyance, maybe even surprise. Then the cop laughed, a slow, amused chuckle. "You got a mouth on you," he muttered. Then, with a tap on the dashboard, the car suddenly accelerated, tires screeching as it sped down the block. Malik exhaled sharply. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and hit record. His voice was steady, even though his body wasn't. "So now they're following me. This is what happens when you speak up." He posted it immediately. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. People were already talking about the first video. Now, they had more to add to the conversation. Jalen called him. "Dude, you really trying to get yourself killed?" "They're not gonna stop," Malik said. "So neither am I." Jalen let out a low breath. "Man, I hope you know what you're doing." Malik wasn't sure he did, but backing down wasn't an option. That night, the city was restless. News stations were reporting on the video. The story was getting bigger, too big to ignore. And Malik wasn't the only one watching. Somewhere downtown, in a dimly lit office, the cop scrolled through the comments, his jaw tight. People were calling for investigations. Protests were being planned. His name wasn't out there yet, but it was only a matter of time. His partner paced behind him. "This is getting out of hand." The cop's grip tightened on his phone. "The kid doesn't know when to quit." The partner hesitated. "Maybe we should lay low for a bit." A slow smile spread across the cop's face. "No, we remind him where he stands." His fingers moved swiftly over his phone, typing a message. "Take it down." Now, no response. Another message. Nothing. The cop's smile faded. "All right then," he muttered, standing up. His partner frowned. "What are you thinking?" The cop grabbed his jacket. "I'm thinking it's time to show this kid what real fear looks like." Malik was at home, pacing his room, his phone still blowing up with notifications. His stomach was tight with nerves, but he felt something else, something stronger, determination. Then, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. His breath caught. He stared at the screen for a long moment before opening the message. Unknown number. Step outside. A chill ran down his spine. He rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. There, a black car, parked across the street. The cop was standing outside, looking right at him. Malik's heart pounded. His fingers hovered over his phone. He could call someone, Jalen, his uncle, even the police. But what good would that do? The cop raised his hand in a slow, mocking wave. Then he pointed to the ground. A silent command. Come outside. Malik's breath was shallow. He knew this was a trap. He knew stepping out that door could change everything. But he also knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. Malik's pulse hammered against his ribs. Stood frozen at the window, staring down at the cop across the street. The night air outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his next move. His phone buzzed again, and no number. Now, Malik's fingers tightened around the curtain. Whole body screamed at him to stay inside, to lock the doors, to call someone, anyone. But deep down, he knew calling the police was useless. They were the problem. The officer didn't move. He just stood there, his posture relaxed, his smirk barely visible under the dim street light. But Malik knew what this was, a game of power, a test, and if he ignored it, the rules would only get worse. His breath was shaky as he grabbed his phone and slipped it into his pocket. His heart pounded as he made his way downstairs. Yes, each step, feeling like it could be his last. The front door loomed before him. He hesitated. Once you step out, there's no turning back. Steeling himself, Malik gripped the handle and pushed the door open. The cool night air hit his skin instantly, but he barely felt it. The cop's smirk widened as Malik stepped onto the porch. Good boy, the officer said, his voice smooth, taunting. Malik gritted his teeth. What do you want? The cop took a few slow steps forward, his boots scuffing against the pavement. You're making a lot of noise, kid. Drawing attention. That's a mistake. Malik stood his ground. The mistake was pulling a gun on me in the first place. The officer chuckled, shaking his head. And yet, here you are, all alone. No camera this time. No crowd. Just you and me. A car engine rumbled from down the street. Malik flicked his gaze toward it, a patrol car, creeping into view. His stomach dropped. Another cop was behind the wheel. He was being boxed in. The officer in front of him tilted his head. You really think that little video's gonna change anything? People forget, stories fade. And you? He took another step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're just another kid who doesn't know his place. Know your place, boy. The words sent a surge of anger through Malik's veins. His fists clenched. You don't scare me. The officer smirked. Then you're even dumber than I thought. Suddenly, the cop moved fast. Malik barely had time to react before a strong hand gripped his shirt, yanking him forward. Let me go, Malik snarled, shoving at the officer's arm. The grip tightened. You think you're a hero? The cop growled. Let me tell you how this ends. You disappear. Your little protest dies out. And everyone moves on. Malik's breath came fast. He struggled against the officer's hold, but the man was stronger, pulling him in close. You don't belong in this fight, the cop whispered. Malik's mind raced. His free hand shot toward his pocket. His fingers fumbled for his phone, gripping it tight. If he could hit record, a sharp shove sent him stumbling backward. His phone slipping from his grip, it clattered to the ground between them. The cop stepped on it. A sickening crack filled the air. Malik's stomach twisted. His proof, his protection was gone. The officer sighed, shaking his head. Shame. Thought you had more sense. The patrol car door opened. Heavy footsteps approached. Malik's chest heaved. He was outnumbered. No witnesses, no phone, no way out. A new voice cut through the tension. The hell is going on here? Malik turned sharply. A figure was jogging toward them. Jalen. Relief flooded through him until he saw the look on his best friend's face. Jalen was tense, his fists curled, but there was fear in his eyes, too. He knew they were in deep. The cop's smirk returned. Oh, look, another troublemaker. Jalen glanced at Malik, then at the patrol car. His voice was low. You good, man? Malik's breath was uneven. They think they can shut me up. Jalen's jaw tightened. Ain't happening. The second officer chuckled. You kids never learn. Malik's eyes darted between them. He knew what was coming next. They weren't going to talk anymore. This was about to get physical. His pulse roared in his ears. Fight or flight. The cop in front of him reached for something at his waist. Malik's stomach clenched. He wasn't about to wait for what came next. Malik moved first. With a burst of adrenaline, he twisted to the side, shoving past the cop. Jalen reacted, instantly stepping in to block the officer from grabbing Malik again. "Run!" Jalen shouted. Malik bolted. His legs pumped, his lungs burned. The city blurred around him as he sprinted down the street. Behind him, he heard Jalen curse, heard the heavy footsteps of officers giving chase. A radio crackled. Malik didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He ducked into an alley, heart hammering. His eyes darted around dumpsters, a rusted fire, escape, an old fence. Think fast. He scrambled onto a trash can, grabbing the fire escape ladder. It rattled under his weight as he pulled himself up. His muscles screamed, but he kept climbing. Voices echoed below. "Where is he?" Malik flattened against the rooftop, panting hard. His chest felt like it might explode. He peeked over the edge. The cops were still searching the alley. Then, a scream. "Jalen!" Malik's stomach dropped. He saw Jalen pinned to the pavement, an officer's knee on his back. His best friend struggled, his voice raw with rage. Malik's hands clenched into fists. His mind screamed at him to do something, but he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He could only watch. Malik's fingers dug into the rooftops edge as he watched Jalen struggle beneath the cop's knee. His best friend's face was twisted in pain. His voice hoarse as he shouted, "Get off me!" The officer didn't budge. A second cop stood nearby, gripping his baton, eyes darting around. They knew they had to move fast before anyone saw. Malik's breath came fast and ragged. His mind raced. He could run. He could escape. But Jalen wouldn't. His stomach twisted. He couldn't just stand. Here, a voice inside him screamed, "Do something!" His pulse thundered in his ears. His muscles coiled. Then he moved. Malik swung his legs over the rooftop's edge and dropped down. The impact sent a jolt up his legs, but he barely felt it. He sprinted forward, pure adrenaline carrying him. The officers barely had time to react before Malik was there. He threw himself at the cop, pinning Jalen down, ramming his shoulder into the man's side. The officer stumbled, his grip slipping. Jalen gasped, rolling away. "Go!" Malik yelled. Jalen scrambled to his feet. The second cop lunged. Malik barely ducked in time. A baton whistled past his ear. He felt the rush of air, heard the dull crack as it slammed into the pavement where his head had been. The first cop recovered fast. He spun, fury twisting his face. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." His hand shot to his holster. Malik's breath hitched. "No, no, no." The gun came free. The cop raised it. A shout. "Hey!" The voice rang out like a gunshot. Malik twisted his head. Down the block, figures were running toward them, neighbors, people from the apartments, and more than that, cameras. Phones were out, recording. The cops hesitated. Malik didn't. He grabbed Jalen's arm, yanking him back. "Run!" They bolted, feet pounding against the pavement. Malik didn't know where they were going. He just knew they had to get away. Behind them, the officers shouted, but they weren't chasing anymore. To many eyes, Malik's chest heaved. His legs burned, but he didn't stop. Not until they were blocks away, ducking into an alley, gasping for breath. Jalen clutched his knees, his face slick with sweat. "Man, you're crazy." Malik swallowed hard. His whole body shook. "I couldn't let them take you." Jalen let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "They were gonna kill you, bro." Malik exhaled. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then Jalen smirked. "But damn, that was a move. They're gonna be pissed." Malik's lips curled. "Good." He pulled out his backup phone. He still had one. He opened his messages, his fingers flying. "New post. They tried to stop me. They failed." He hit send. Within minutes, it spread. And this time, the world wasn't just watching. It was ready to fight back. If you like this story, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, in order to strengthen our community, I would like to know where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.